Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. And thank you for joining us. So today's topic is getting the most out of JAWS, the Focus 40 Braille Display and the Elbraille. And we've got two expert presenters today. We've got Danny Keogh, our Assistive Technology Software and Blindness Specialist here at Quantum. And we've got Damian McMorrow, who's the National Access Technology Manager at Vision Australia. And we've also got Peter Cracknell in from our Brisbane office of Quantum, who's being the camera person today. So thanks, Peter. So just a bit of housekeeping to start. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands from which this webinar is being presented. And for me, that's the Darug people of the Eora Nation here in Sydney, and pay our respects to any elders past or present. Just a little bit of our webinar housekeeping in case you haven't joined us from one of these sessions before. So your microphone will be muted for the webinar, but there will be time for questions at the end. We would prefer, if you've got any questions, if you can type them in the Q&A section, which you can tab to or click on the Q&A, or you can use the chat, and the shortcut for that is Alt and H. If you're also having any technical queries, you can also use the chat. We are recording the webinar, and I'll make that link available to everybody afterwards that's registered or has asked for it. So just a little bit of an overview of the session today. It will go for about an hour and a half. So first of all, Damian and Danny are going to talk about their journey with Braille and why they use it and how they use JAWS. Then Danny is going to go over some key features of JAWS just briefly, and then discuss why you might use a Braille device and some benefits of that, and also give an overview of the Focus 40 in particular and JAWS Braille features, and also using the Focus as a standalone device. And then Damian's going to talk about his personal experience of using the Elbraille and give a bit of an overview of the device, and also talk about the Elbraille, a recent thing with making the shortcuts a bit easier using an option called Leasy. And he may also demonstrate, hopefully, one of the programs he uses for one of his hobbies. And then we will have time for questions at the end. So just to introduce Danny and Damian. So Danny's been working for Quantum, doing our software support and also providing training with both Braille devices and JAWS for over, about close to 20 years now, Danny. And Damian's the National Access Technology Manager for Client Services for Vision Australia, and he's also a user of these devices as well. So yeah, they're both passionate about technology and computing. So we might get started with how you got started with Braille and JAWS. If Danny and Damian, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Beck. 17 years. 2004 I actually first started. Close. 20 years of not quite there yet.
Sorry.
Couple more to go yet. That's all right. Being blind since birth, born in 1973, Braille displays didn't exist back then. So like a lot of people, I started learning Braille on the old metal, very heavy Perkins Braillers. I think like a lot of people, one arm was a lot stronger than the other with having to lug one of those things around. Went right through primary school, into high school, again using one, up until, it really wasn't until the 2000s when I first had the opportunity to actually use a Braille display. And it was an old Tiemann, I think was the model, which I think is just an Optelec product from Europe, from the Netherlands. Very, very big, very clunky, very noisy device it was then, but still based on a similar concept. So for people who don't know, Braille Display basically is a device where you have pins that raise themselves and lower themselves in the shape of the Braille, whatever Braille letters you need to do. So most displays can be 40 cells, some are 20. You get some odd numbers. 32 is an odd number that seems to pop up a lot, which is apparently the width of an A4 page. That's where that one comes from. And there are some other numbers as well. But getting into it with JAWS really actually came through with my job. I found I was one of the lucky ones who could listen to a phone call and listen to JAWS at the same time and be able to pass on information, but I wasn't great at it. So that's where a Braille display really came in handy for me, where I had that in front of me. I didn't necessarily have to listen. The JAWS speech wasn't interfering with any sort of phone calls I happened to be on. It was also handy for doing the odd presentation, which I have done. Even situations like this, sometimes I keep my notes if I, depending on what we're doing, webinars like this one, also keep access to my notes on there. So that's kind of it for my introduction. And as I said, I've seen and used multiple Braille displays, mostly through my job. And until recently, I actually never owned one. So now that that's happened, make life a lot easier. So I'll hand over to Damian and he can tell you his story.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. So I, like Danny, I guess started out using a Perkins and used that all the way through primary school. Got very good actually at getting up a good swing with them. You could kind of kneecap people with the little winders sticking out the side of the Perkins. It's probably about the best thing you could do with them. Not that I was a horrible kid. I don't want to give anyone that idea.
Or cars.
That's right. Yes, you could do some damage. So I started using one of those, and then later on with a Braille to print hanging off the bottom of it, so that I could have my work output to an old dot matrix printer. During sort of my high school and uni, I didn't use Braille a lot simply because I didn't have a lot of access to it. So I tended to rely a lot on speech. And that brought with it a number of problems, I guess, particularly around things like document formatting and those sorts of things. And knowing whether you'd spelt things incorrectly, and whether you're in the bullet points lined up and all of those sorts of things. Got hold of a Braille display in around about 2000. It was originally my first Braille device was an old Braille Note Classic, then I in my work life, I found that I was starting to have to give a lot of presentations, and I was dealing with some quite fast-paced meetings where people would, bark, request for information at you in a management meeting. And I found navigating that with speech was quite difficult. So I got a Focus 40, one of the very early ones from about 2007 or 2008. And that thing is still running. But I found that being able to sort of having figures in front of me, being able to read things out, and also for sort of chairing meetings and those sorts of things, it was really helpful to have Braille under my fingers. The other thing that I found around about 2010, I started doing a bit of internet radio broadcasting, and I haven't mastered the art of listening to JAWS and reading things out, particularly things like listener emails and tweets and those sorts of things. And so having access to a Braille display in my personal life became a really big thing, because I could read things out, I could present information. And in my current role, I deliver a lot of PowerPoint presentations, that sort of thing. And being able to know and have confidence with what is on screen is a huge thing. And being able to deliver that without an earbud in and that sort of thing. So I use a Braille display a lot in my professional life. I still do the radio broadcasting on a Saturday morning, and I also am an avid amateur radio enthusiast. And I find that when you're trying to make a contact, particularly a distant one from an overseas station, the last thing you want is to have speech in your ear at the same time. So being able to make notes in Braille, being able to read things back and log my contacts and those sorts of things through Braille, I find extremely helpful. So it's become an essential part of almost everything I do technology-wise, having access to Braille. Back to you, Danny.
Yeah.
Start and show us some of the wondrous things it can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of expand on the university side of things too. Braille displays for me in a situation like that would actually not have worked. Not very well, because one of the things I did find, especially doing some fairly advanced maths, because I did do a computer science degree, is a lot of that stuff you really... Yeah, look, Braille displays are all right maybe for reading the stuff, but for actually working out gets a bit tricky. Anyway, so what we're going to do next is we're going to have a look at a couple of features, and most of today's webinar is concentrating on the Focus 40 with JAWS. But one of the questions that I do get asked, and that some of us do get asked, is, well, why did you pick JAWS over anything else that was available? So I want to have a brief look at a couple of features before we actually get onto the focus. I want to have a brief look at a couple of features that sort of explains that and goes through a couple of the things I use in my day-to-day, which as far as I'm aware are not available in other screen readers. So just bear with me for a second while we do a little bit of screen sharing. And also...
Webinar, unmute, current.
There we go. Great.
All right, so...
D:/web.
Now, I do apologise if there's a very slight echo. Unfortunately, there's not
Home.
much I can do about that.
Microsoft Word users text analyzer docs enter.
So, I'm opening
Word. Opening Word. Text analyzer docs Word. Text.
Now,
blank.
one of the things that part of my job does entail is doing a lot of document writing. Now, whether that be for things like training, whether that's for even just general emails, things have to be formatted properly, things have to be proofread, things have to be correct. So there's a couple of tools that JAWS has that allows me to do that. And the first one I want to have a look at is something called the text analyzer, which is actually a really, really handy tool for proofreading. Now, obviously, before you send a document to somebody, you'll proofread it, you'll run through it with the speech, and try and get as much information as possible out of it. That's perfectly fine. You can certainly do that. But doing it that way, you'll miss things. There are things that you might miss unless you go right into all the JAWS proofreading modes, and we'll have a look at a couple of those shortly. So what JAWS has is a feature called the text analyzer. What this does is it looks for changes. It looks for things that might be wrong with the document. So it'll tell me where there's things like font changes. It'll tell me where there's color. It'll tell me where there's bolded text. It will tell me a couple of other things too. Now, they may not necessarily be mistakes, but it is going to tell me about them anyway, just on the off chance they are. So there's a couple of ways we can do it. I'm just going to demonstrate one of these for now.
Blank.
Now, the document that we have open is just a piece of one that I normally use for training, and it's just describing some of the changes. Some of the bits and pieces to do with how the desktop's laid out, what the taskbar is, and a few other bits and pieces there. So let's go through this. Now, the sorts of information we're looking for, I have everything turned on. So it's going to tell me any changes that it can see, but it's also going to tell me things that might be wrong, and I'll get to those when we come to them. So let's do the keystroke Windows Alt-I.
Font change Arial 14 points bold on italic on. Some.
Okay, so we want that. That's a font change.
Heading level 2 some def.
That's a heading. Okay, we do want that. So let's go to the next one.
Font change Times New Roman 12 points bold off italic.
Okay, we have another
blank.
Font change.
Heading level 3, the taskbar. The taskbar is the heading.
So we've got more headings. So this is all stuff that we want.
Font change times.
We want the other font changed. Now,
Space run at 431.
space run. A space run is a mistake. So now we've actually found something which we need to correct. We have more than one space.
E. Space. Space. Space.
So all I'm using here is my right arrow key to move through this, and the JAWS cursor, when you're using this method, the text analyzer, the cursor is dropped directly onto where the problem is.
Space.
So let's correct this.
Space. C. Space. E.
There we go.
Echo.
That's done. And we'll go to the next one.
Unclosed left quote at 538.
Unclosed quote. So again, we have
Space. Left quote. P-I-N-N-E-D. Space.
whoops, I meant to close that.
D. Space.
So let's go ahead and close it.
Quote.
Put a quote in there.
P. Space.
That's now fixed up. So you get the idea. You get the idea of the sorts of things this is actually looking for. You can turn some of this stuff off. There's ways where you can automatically do it. You can also have this feature enabled so that as you're moving through a document, it will actually give you the errors or give you the whatever the changes are. I'm doing it the manual way, which to an extent I prefer, but there are other ways of doing this as well. Now, one of the other features I like is what are called speech and sound schemes. And what they allow you to do is replace information with either different voices or different sounds. Now we're not going to do, I can do a little bit of demonstrating with this today. So what I'll do is we'll bring up the schemes that are currently available.
Select a scheme dialog. List 1, list view. Word Classic. 23 of 23.
So Word Classic is the one that just reads things as they are. Let's move to one of the proofreading.
Kindle. Proofreading left parent attributes. Font info and color right. Scheme proofreading left.
So let's have a look at this.
Arial, white background, heading level 1 moving around windows, bold grammar,
With
the keyboard,
You get the idea.
blank. Blank.
Times New Roman,
The following tables list the most commonly used Windows keystrokes. These are keyboard commands you can use regardless of if you will work blank, blank.
Arial, bold italic,
Heading level 2.
So that's going to read all of that information out every time something changes, every time there's different text, every time there's heading levels, every time you come across tables, all of that information is going to be read. And all of this is done with speech and sound schemes. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail on how they're actually created. I don't really... If people do want to know more about that, if you are a subscriber to our JAWS Bytes publication, then I've already produced 3 audio demonstrations on exactly how this all is all put together, how it all works. So check those out, and if you're not subscribed to that, get in contact with us and we can certainly get that to you. Okay, let's move this back to the normal.
Select a scheme. End. Word class. Scheme. Word class.
Back to Word Classic so that it's doing things. Now, replacing things with sounds.
Windows M.
We can show this.
JAWS context menu. Options. Basics. ... Enter. Leaving menus.
Okay, so this is just the normal basics dialog for JAWS. So as I tab through this,
Off radio button. 1 of 4.
oops, what did I hear there?
Off radio button. 1 of 4.
I heard 2 beeps and it said off. Okay, so those 2 beeps,
Off radio.
let's move to somewhere else where they're a little bit more useful. But first,
Automatically start JAWS ... Automatically start JAWS ... Prompt to confirm when exiting.
so we have a checkbox. So instead of it saying checked or not checked, I've got JAWS to do. So all I'm doing there is pressing the spacebar and turning off the checked and not checked options for this. So that's just a really, really brief overview of what this thing can do. You can get it to do it with fonts. There's all sorts of things you can do in here. It looks far more complicated than it actually is. Trust me, it's nowhere near as complicated as it looks. And as I said, if you want access to those audio demonstrations that we've done, and I think the whole thing goes for just over an hour, then get in contact with us, and we can certainly get you put onto our list so that you'll get these in future. Now,
Text analyzer.edit. Heading level 1.
the third thing that comes in handy is what is called Skim Reading.
Skim reading dialog. Read first line of every paragraph. Radio button checked. 1 of 4.
Now, there's a few things you can do in here. And I'm only going to do a couple of these because some of them actually do get quite complex. And again, we've already looked at this. I've looked at it. I've already done another audio demonstration of this. Again, get in contact with us if you want copies of any of these. So skim reading allows us to do a couple of things. Now, so let's say...
Read first sentence of every paragraph. Radio button.
I want to read the first sentence of every paragraph. Well, there's 2 ways to do that.
Skim read. Start skim reading button.
We can either just press this button here, and JAWS is just going to go through and read the first just read the first sentence of every paragraph. It'll skip everything else. The other thing we can do...
Create summary button.
...is we can create a summary. So let's go ahead and do that.
Edit. Lost focus. D:\back meeting controls. Zoom results viewer.
Okay. So...
Blank. Blank.
Oh, and it's not working. Oh, the joys of technology. All right.
Text D:\meet Zoom cloud meeting results. Text analyzer.docs dash.
Okay. So what is supposed to happen there is that in a part of JAWS called the results viewer or the virtual viewer, you would get a list of those particular options. You get a list of the first sentences. You can arrow down through them, press enter on the one you want, and it'll drop you straight there. But apparently that doesn't seem to want to cooperate for this for the moment. So we'll leave that.
Task meeting.
We'll stop screen share so that we can get a little bit more detail on the camera up in Brisbane. So what I'm going to do now is move on and actually do a bit of a description of the Focus 40. What this thing's all about, some of the controls, and as I said, we'll do a brief description. We'll also have Peter up there up there with Damian, and he'll be doing a bit of camera work to actually show the people who can see the screen exactly what it is I'm talking about. So the Focus 40 is a 40-cell Braille display. Now, what do I mean by that? When you're dealing with Braille displays, a character, or when you're dealing with Braille in general, actually, a character is classified as is called a cell. So the Focus 40 has 40 cells of Braille, and that's a standard sort of Perkins Braille width if you use the wide paper. So the display is slightly wider than 40 cells. It's probably a very similar width to a Perkins Braille, those of you who've seen one. It'd be a very similar width to that because there are controls at either end of the Braille display itself. So we'll have a look at the top surface. And starting from the front, in the middle, we have the space bar. And then behind that, we actually have our Braille. So this thing's been ergonomically designed, and you'll see why shortly. So behind the space bar, we have our actual Braille cells. At either end of those, we have a rocker bar and a small round button. So the little rocker switch, you can press it either up, or you can press the bottom part of it to move down. And that does several things depending on where you are at the time, and we'll go through a couple of the functions of that. The button directly behind that, the small round mode button, controls the function of those rocker switches. Behind the Braille cells, we have a group of 40 buttons. Don't let that put you off. Those are called the cursor routers. And they are designed when you're in an edit field of some kind. They are designed to actually move the cursor to the cell that they correspond to, the cell that they're directly behind. There's a couple of situations where they're used for other things as well, but for the most part, you would use those for editing. If you're using one of these devices on a Mac, they're used for opening programs and a few other bits and pieces. Directly behind the cursor routers, we have our Braille keyboard, the 8-key Braille keyboard. So your standard 6 dots, your Enter, and your backspace, which are also referred to, the Enter and backspace, or backspace and Enter, is also referred to as dot 7 for the backspace and dot 8 for the Enter. And we'll explain a little bit of that shortly, and Damian will also go through some of that as well. Now, in between dots 1 and 4, you have a small rectangular key, which is the menu key. And that does a couple of things with the Braille display just standalone. On the front panel of the display, and the front panel slopes, it's on a bit of an angle. Starting from the left, you have a panning key, and that has a double arrow facing to the left. Next in, you have what's called a rocker bar, and again, that has several functions depending on where you are at the time. The next button in from there is what's called a selector button, and we won't really look at what those do so much today, but they can be used for things like a continuous read mode where it changes every few seconds, and a few other bits, and they're generally used for key commands. Directly below the space bar in the middle, you have the left and the right shift keys. Now, don't be confused. They do not do the same thing as the left and right shift keys on a standard keyboard. You do not use them for capital letters. They're used for commands. So pressing left or right shift in conjunction with something else. So for example, pressing the right shift in conjunction with dot 4 will bring up the start menu or the start screen when you're using this display with JAWS. So don't get them confused with the left and right keys on your number pad. Now, the right-hand side is basically the left hand in reverse. So you have your selector button, your rocker bar, and your right panning control. On the left-hand end, you have, and I'd be very, very surprised if this can even remotely show up on camera, you have a very, very small slot right up buried underneath the little the protective bumper on the end where you would slide in an SD card, because you are able to store files on here. You have the power button and then the USB-C connection as well. On the right hand end, you don't have anything apart from the bumper. So hopefully that gives people a bit of a description of how this thing's laid out, what some of the controls actually do. What we're trying to do here, and we do have a mix of people on this webinar. We have a mix of people who can see the camera, and we have a mix of people who don't. And that's one of the reasons why I'm going through these descriptions in as much detail as I possibly can, because I understand that not everybody's actually going to see what I'm holding in front of me or what Peter's showing on the camera. So,
thanks, Danny.
So, who would actually use one of these things? Who would use it? What would you use it for? Well, as Damian pointed out a few situations earlier where it would be useful, presentations, in meetings, things like that, because the folk that, and even something like a meeting, you could quite easily have your laptop on one side of the room and your Braille display on the other, because this thing also does have Bluetooth connections as well. So if you wanted to do that, you could sit your laptop somewhere, have the Braille display in front of you. You won't be taking up too much space and looking at people over a screen, or they won't be looking at you over a screen, and work it out that way. Who else would find this sort of thing useful? Somebody who does a lot of work in noisy environments. They might be a screen reader user. They might be a JAWS user who has to work in noisy environments and can't always necessarily wear headphones. So you've obviously got the Braille output there. You have people who are deaf-blind, who maybe physically can't hear a computer anyway. And at least then that gives them a way of actually being able to access what's going on. And you can pretty much use JAWS entirely in Braille once you know what you're doing. It's a bit of a learning curve, but it is possible to do it. Situations that I come across dealing with phone calls. Sometimes I find it easier just to read, especially if it's something small. Sometimes I find it easier just to read things with Braille. You can, especially phone numbers, things like that, it just works out easier. You can use it for proofreading. There's all sorts of situations where you might actually want to use one of these. So let me get back into screen sharing again. And we'll demonstrate a couple of things here.
Unmute.
Now,
Windows M, desktop, folder view list.
so I have the Braille display sitting in front of me. Now, it's very difficult to show Braille on camera because the dots are so small, and in a lot of cases, cameras aren't necessarily good enough, or even something like Zoom meetings, the resolution may not be high enough. You don't have high enough definition to do it. You would need some pretty decent equipment to show that. So what we can do instead, and for those of you who can see the screen, we can certainly we'll certainly get some use out of this. So
Braille enabling the Braille viewer.
the Braille viewer is a function in JAWS which puts a bar across the top of the screen, and then in that bar it actually has the Braille dots for what's currently on your Braille display, plus the printed text. So those of you who can see it will see that in my Braille viewer it says something like DSKLV Zoom 15 of 31.
Mm-hmm.
So we're basically on the desktop here. We're on my desktop for my work computer. And there's a few things we can do at this point. Now, navigation is handled in multiple ways. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. Whatever works for you, if it does the job, then it's right. So don't ever let anybody tell you it's the wrong way if it works. So there's a couple of things we can do. Now, a lot of simulating keystrokes when you've only got about 9 keys plus a few extra buttons is not necessarily always easy to do. So we talked earlier about the rocker switches at either end of the Braille display. Now, if I press the mode button, which is the one behind one of those,
List mode on.
list mode on, so I can now use those rocker switches.
Team viewer. Location : team view. Open book 9.0. NVDA.
To move through my desktop. And yes, I do have NVDA on my work computer with JAWS. Good as a backup screen reader. So we can either do it that way.
List mode off.
So we've turned list mode off, and again I just press the rocker switch. The other way we can do it is with the arrow keys. And to do those we use what's called a chorded command. Now, a chorded command, anybody who's used Braille displays before would probably be aware that this sort of thing exists. You hold the space bar down and press combinations of other buttons. So with these, if I hold my space bar down and press dots 1, 2, and 3.
Not selected. Recycle bin. Contains the file.
Straight to the top left-hand corner of the desktop. Space bar and dot 4.
Desktop.ini. Type : desktop.ini.
Down arrow key. So all that's happening here, and those of you who can see the Braille viewer will see that the text on there is changing as well, and as is the text on my Braille display here. So navigation is actually quite simple. So we can do...
Meeting control. Text analyzer. D colon back. Zip result. Meeting text analyzer. Docs. Dash. Edit.
If we open our text analyzer document again, the one that we had up before, then there's a couple of things we can do now with this as well. We can just use the panning keys and just move through the document. Now, JAWS isn't going to speak at this point because all I'm doing is just reading it with Braille. And what we need to explain at this point is the concept of different cursors that JAWS has. Now, most of you would know what a cursor is. It tells you where you're currently looking, where you're editing, what's actually happening. In JAWS, you have multiple cursors available and they are not always visible on the screen. The PC cursor, which a lot of you would be familiar with, it just follows the highlight. That follows whatever it is you're currently doing, whether you're on the desktop or in a menu, whatever it happens to be, in a document, whatever. The virtual cursor, some of you would have heard that term before, is used on the internet. And today we introduce the Braille cursor. So you are able to move the Braille independent of where your actual cursor is. So let's press the cursor router, and all I've done is moved to the letter K in the word keyboard. So on the line here, I have keyboard commands you can use regardless of which screen, and that's the text that's currently on my Braille line. So if I press these cursor routers, those people who can see the screen can see I'm jumping the cursor all over the place. I've now got it on the M, and I can get JAWS to read that.
M. Mike.
I'm going to press another cursor router. Let's get that onto way over to the right-hand side.
C. S.
Oops.
C.
I bumped the keyboard there. So all I'm doing there is just getting JAWS to read out where I'm actually putting the cursor. Now, the rocker switches at either end of the Braille display with the mode buttons. We can get those to read by different amounts. What do I mean by that? Okay, so let's...
Lines.
I'm pressing the mode button for the right hand rocker. I've set it to line, so as I move down, it's moving the Braille down a line at a time.
Sentences.
We can go by sentence, and it'll move the Braille across a sentence. Now, when you're navigating this way, JAWS does not read. JAWS doesn't read where you are. The Braille's doing its thing, but it doesn't actually do it by speech.
Paragraphs.
We can go by paragraph.
Display panning.
Or we can go by what's called display panning. Now, what that means is however many characters are on your display, that's how much it'll move every time you use one of these rockers. Now, we can set these independently of each other. So I can have the right one, which is currently set to display panning.
Paragraphs.
And I can set the left-hand one to paragraphs. And JAWS will remember those settings. So they are completely independent of each other. You do not have to have them set the same way. Really handy way of actually being able to get access. Sorry, bear with me, guys. I'm keeping a very close eye on time here because we're sort of on a...
I know you're doing fine, Danny.
Little bit of a restricted time. So look, that's some really basic navigation. Again, with the rockers on the front.
Sighted user could click this button with a mouse to bring up the start menu.
All I'm doing is the rocker bar on the front of the Braille display. So on the front sloping panel, the left-hand one.
Like pressing the Windows or Start button on your keyboard.
Will physically move down by lines and JAWS is going to read it. Now the right-hand one is going to move the Braille display down and it's going to leave the cursor where it currently is. So again, people who can see the Braille viewer can tell that I'm moving the Braille display, but JAWS isn't reading anything and the cursor on the screen is not moving. Now, for people who aren't aware, sighted users have been able to do this for a long time. And that is to scroll through a document with the mouse without actually moving the cursor. I've never found a way of doing that properly with speech, but you can do it with Braille. So you can leave the cursor where it is. Okay, I've found the part where I want. Press the cursor router and bang, my cursor's moved to the W in when. So pretty straightforward to actually operate this. And again, all I'm using here is the rocker bars on the front of the Braille display. Now these ones you can, to an extent, you can set what they do, but the settings are kind of stuck in position. So, all right. Let's have a look at a couple of basic things. Some Braille settings. What would you actually want to do? How would you want to set this thing up when you first get it? To do that, we'll have a look at the JAWS settings. So let me bring up
Word-JAWS Settings Center. Search JAWS Settings Center default left parent all applications. Tree view,
Okay.
user, closed, 1 of
So,
27.
This is a part of JAWS called the Settings Center. There's a lot of options in here, but we want the Braille
Braille,
settings.
closed,
Now,
Braille, open,
I'm
6
not going to go
items.
through all of these because, again, there's loads of settings. There's a lot of different settings in here, and we're not here to sort of teach you how to do this. We're just here to give you a little bit of an idea of how things actually work. So, some of the things I would recommend, if you are an experienced Braille reader, that you do when you first get any Braille display, but specifically one of these as well, to change it JAWS so that it works best in this situation.
1,
So we need to
general,
open
closed,
here.
1 of
I need
6,
to open
general,
again.
open, 2, translation closed, 1 of 9, general,
We need to open
translation open,
translation. Now, translation is something I need to explain while we're here. There are two types of translation. You have forward translation, which is print to Braille, and backward translation, which is Braille to print. Now, JAWS does both of those because you are able to enter Braille characters actually on the display itself. And they will get, if you enter contracted Braille, it will get uncontracted as you put it in there and just get put on the screen as standard text. And JAWS also goes the other way too. So we need to set those because by default, if you connect a Braille display to JAWS and haven't done any of this, you're going to get uncontracted computer Braille, which some people can read, some people have trouble reading it. So, what do we want to do?
3, language English-United States,
So we
1
want
of
to leave the language as it is. And I'm not quite sure why all of these options are under US and not under anything else. There is no option for Australian English, so we leave it as US.
Output Unified English Braille Grade 2,
So you have several options there. We can set this to
Computer Braille,
we can
1
set
of
it to
5,
computer Braille,
U.S English Grade 1, 2 of
US English
5.
Grade 1. Now, US English Braille is just pre-Unified English Braille. So people who can remember reading a lot of stuff in the 90s, a lot of it you would have read as US English Braille. And some of it would have been British English as well. But they're almost the same, but it's before UEB came in. You've then got the option you can do
U.S English Grade 2,
you can do UEB
Unified
Grade
English
1.
Unified English Braille Grade 2,
But
5 of 5.
we want UEB Grade 2. So our next option,
Input Computer Braille,
we don't want computer Braille as the input.
Unified English Braille Grade 2,
We
2
want
of
it set
2.
to Unified English Braille instead. We don't want computer Braille. That's a pain. It's uncontracted and some of the punctuation's different. So
Show current word in Computer Braille.
Unavailable.
So a lot of these other options are all personal preference. To be honest, that is all I set. And there's another option further down where you can turn off underlining, because one of the things I did neglect to mention before is that all of the cells on these Braille displays have 8 dots instead of 6, because the bottom 2 dots are used for things like the cursor and also for underlining text, which you are able to do. Now, some people have no trouble reading text when it's underlined. I don't particularly like it, so it's something I do turn off. So those 3 options. Oh yes, and of course the most important one is to look for the option that talks about status cells and turn that off as well. So those 4 options, which would literally take you about 15 seconds if you know where they are, that's what I would advise people to do
Enter. Text analyze.
when they first get a Braille display. Just makes it easier to read. Does make it much easier to read it. Now,
Recording to the cloud.
One other thing that I want to have a very, very quick look at before I talk about the scratch pad is Braille study mode. Now, there's a couple of things we can do here. We can either turn it on permanently, which I'm not going to bother with that. But if you are learning Braille, if you're somebody who's just starting or just getting into contracted Braille, this can come in really handy. So I have a text line up in front of me which says, working with full stop, when all windows are closed or minimized. Okay, let's say for an example, I don't know what the width contraction is. The dots 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Say for example, I don't know what that actually means. So what I can do is press one of the mode buttons, hold that in and press the cursor router.
With sign.
And yours just tells me that it's the width sign. I can do it on another contraction. I can also do it on a letter.
W.
We can do it on...
IN sign.
So George's going to read all of that information out. So whatever you happen to be on, it will actually read it. If it's a symbol that it doesn't know what it is, then it'll just tell you what dots you've actually used. And an example there might be somewhere if you have, say, a dot 4, 5, 6 followed by another letter or whatever the case is. But if there's a symbol there which precedes something else to make a meaning, it doesn't actually mean anything on its own, then JAWS will just read out the actual letters that are involved.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, the scratch pad. And this is unfortunately something I'm not able to show, but I can give you a very, very brief description of what it is. The scratch pad is basically 2 things. It is a very, very basic notepad style text editor, which is built into the Braille display itself. You do not have to have the display connected to anything to get this to work. So anybody who's used Notepad on a computer, anybody who's used Notepad under Windows, you're looking at something very, very similar to that. So you open this thing up, you can Braille away, save it. That's what the SD card is for, that I mentioned before, or the micro SD card, sorry. You can actually save it to that card. There are ways to export that. You can connect this thing up so that it shows up as a drive connected to Windows and get access to the text that way. Now, keep in mind, it records your keystrokes. It does not translate to standard text. So you want to be, if you want straight text, just to be able to open it up in something and read it straight away, then you're going to need to record that. You're going to need to do your notes in uncontracted computer Braille for that to happen. There is no translation built into this device. Now, the other thing it can also do, it can also act as a book reader. Some of you will be familiar with BRF files, Braille formatted files. For people who aren't familiar with it, think of it as the PDF of Braille. It's a standard, it's a worldwide standard. Every single piece of Braille translation software copes with them. Any display that can actually read documents will be able to read these. And with that, you can basically turn this into a book reader. So again, you would just copy them onto the card, open them up in the scratch pad, and then you can go ahead. Now, you can't edit BRF documents. They are read only. And a lot of that's got to do with copyright and a whole load of other bits and pieces and the size of the document. There's also there's a few restrictions, but we can sort of talk to people about that later on if they actually need to. Mm-hmm. There is also a way where you can dump any text that you have got out to JAWS. So what happens with that is you write your text in the scratch pad, bring up the menu, hit export, and it'll dump it directly into Word or whatever you happen to be using. Now, as far as JAWS is concerned, or as far as the Braille translation software built into JAWS is concerned, you've just typed that in on your Braille keyboard. When in actual fact, all that's happening is it's just being dumped out by the USB lead or by Bluetooth directly. The Braille Display handles all of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's about it for me for now. I'll be back obviously a bit later on after Damian's done his bit. I'll be back to help out with any questions and stuff that people have.
Yep, and we have got someone that's raised their hand, but hopefully we can get to you at the end for that. So
I will stop screen share and I will turn my camera off.
Yes. Upper ribbon.
Background people, there's not a lot I can do about that.
No problem, Danny. And so now Damian's going to talk about how the Elbraille and how he uses that and some of its features. So thanks, Damian.
Thanks, Rebecca. So I guess to start off with, let's just talk a little bit about what the Elbraille is. So essentially it is a Windows 10 powered computer, but unlike a conventional computer that has a QWERTY keyboard and a screen, the Elbraille is essentially a docking station which you can fit the Focus 40 into. What that gives you when combined with the Focus 40 and JAWS is a Windows 10 powered computer with Braille input and Braille output. Just to describe the device itself, we have a recess on the front of the device that accommodates the Focus 40. Behind that, on the top surface, we have a row of function buttons that can do various things. And I'll talk through that a little bit more in a moment, but we have a volume rocker. We have a menu button that allows us to get into some inbuilt applications that come with the Elbraille. We have a button that gives us battery and network status, and a button that gives us the time and date and those sorts of things. And there's also some of these function buttons that we can program to do particular things or launch particular apps. Behind that, we have a fan vent and a couple of speakers, one in each of the rear corners of the device. On the right-hand side, we have 2 USB-A ports for plugging in things like USB sticks and so on, and a USB-C port, which is used for either charging the device, or you can connect another laptop via USB-C so that you can use the Focus 40 without undocking it from the Elbraille. So you can use it, if you've got a work laptop, for example, you can plug that into the Elbraille and use the Focus 40 without having to separate the Braille display from the Elbraille. We also have a headphone jack on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, we have a lever which we can pull out to separate the Elbraille from the Focus 40 from the Elbraille docking station. I would have to take it out of the case to demonstrate that, and I'm not going to for the moment. We also have an SD card slot as well. There's also a 4G SIM card slot. So the device does have an LTE modem, and I'll talk a little bit about what that's for in a moment. That's sort of really the physical description. On the front of the device, there is a small grill to accommodate the inbuilt microphone as well. So I guess it may be helpful for me to talk a little bit about why I use an Elbraille, why I like this particular combination. So as I said at the start of in my introduction, I am a Braille user. I use Braille in sort of almost every aspect of what I do with technology. I've also been a JAWS user since 1997, and I do use use JAWS at work, but I also use it for a number of other things. I love the fact that JAWS has the ability to run different scripts. So for things like my broadcasting software, which is a product called Station Playlist, there's a bunch of scripts which allow me to get information really quickly, like how long the current song has left to go, what time in the hour it's going to play, all of those sorts of things. how many, I can interrogate it and find out how many listeners I've currently got. That way I know if I've upset anybody, my listener count goes through the floor. I try not to do that, incidentally, but I can get a whole lot of information from JAWS that way. So I love the power that gives me. So for me, having something with Braille and JAWS all in the one device was a real draw card. Also, because I travel a lot, and I wanted the ability to have everything I need in one device. So I used to travel with my Braille display, so my Focus 40, my work laptop, which I would then hotspot to the phone if I wanted internet access in an airport or something like that. Sometimes I might have an external keyboard depending on what I'm doing. And I also often find that in my line of work, I'm carrying a lot of other equipment to help with assessments and things like that. And I end up being like the traveling roadshow. So having one device which has sort of all of the power of a Windows 10 computer that I can run Office applications, Outlook, PowerPoint, all of those kinds of things. I can use the sort of browser that I'm comfortable with, in my case, Google Chrome. I've got Braille input, Braille output, and it's also, because it has the LTE modem, I don't need to hotspot it to my phone. I can just pop a SIM card into it, and if I don't have access to Wi-Fi, I've still got internet access through the device. So it gives me a really good all-in-one, very powerful sort of solution comparable to that of a Windows 10 laptop and a Braille display. Also, for when I'm presenting, if I'm doing PowerPoint presentations and that sort of thing, I can connect the HDMI cable to it, connect it to a data projector or something like that, have it in front of me on the lectern, and I've got everything there. I've got access to all my files, and I've got a Braille under my fingers. So as a combination for what I do, I find that this works really well as an all-in-one device. When I'm out in the field doing an amateur radio contest or something like that, I've got a device that can run my logging software, and I can, again, I've got access to Braille input, Braille output. I have done a radio show using this device from a motel room when I wasn't sort of in my home studio, and I was able to do that with a good quality microphone, JAWS, my station playlist software, and so on. And that actually worked extremely well. I wasn't troubled by the vagaries of hotel Wi-Fi and all of those kinds of things. So there's so many things that I find having this all-in-one solution is just extremely helpful. The other thing that, and I mentioned before that there is an Elbraille menu, and I will quickly share my screen so that you can hear what's happening. I do apologize. I don't have the RealSpeak synthesizers set up on here, so I'm afraid you're going to have to put up with eloquence. Some of you will be familiar with that anyway. Or just
spacebar, Zoom webinar, leave, Alt plus Q button to activate, press.
That's now working.
Perfect.
So there is a little a suite of built-in applications on the Elbraille, which sort of help to bridge the gap, if you like, between a dedicated Braille note taker and a full Windows 10 computer. So if I press the L1 key, which is the very left hand of the row of function buttons behind the Braille display.
Context menu, my files. To move through items, press
We
up
get
or
a
down
little
arrow
menu.
F.
So the first option in that is my files, which just takes you to my documents folder.
Text editor E.
We have a text editor.
Notes N.
We have an L Notes app, and that does two things. It can allow you to take text notes, and it's quite powerful. It allows you to create different categories and all of those sorts of things. But it also has the ability to record voice notes. So if you're in a position where you just need to record a section of a meeting or quickly dictate a phone number or something like that, or someone's giving you a physical description of a device and you just want to record that to make it sort of quick and easy, you do have that voice recorder capability built in as well.
Phone B.
There is a phone app, which at the moment, if you have a 4G SIM card in the device, does allow you to send texts from the Elbraille.
Audio player A.
There's an audio player, which, as the name suggests, allows you to play audio content.
Office submenu O.
There's a shortcut to the Microsoft Office applications if you have them installed.
Internet browser I.
That takes you straight to your default internet browser, in my case, Chrome.
Email M.
Email, that will launch Microsoft Outlook for me.
Calculator C.
And we have a calculator.
Elbraille utility submenu
And
U.
then a utilities section, which allows you to adjust some of the settings and those sorts of things, turn the modem on and off, that type of thing.
My files F.
So that is a sort of a handy little menu that you can bring up from anywhere and access those sort of note taker
Escape, leaving menus, meeting controls.
Now, I probably should also talk a little bit about, we've been talking about using this as a Windows device. And people might ask, how do you do all your normal Windows shortcuts from a Braille display? Now, JAWS has come up with quite an ingenious way of doing that. And it's one of the reasons why really to get the most out of this, you do have to have JAWS. Well, there was a question, I think, around can you use NVDA with an Elbraille? Obviously, it will run that because it's a Windows 10 device, so you could use that. You could even use Narrator if you wanted to, but you wouldn't have the ability to control everything from the Braille keyboard. You only get that when using JAWS and the focus. So you'd have to plug an external keyboard in if you're going to use any other screen reader. So the way this works, Danny talked before about chorded commands. So what we do for any of the kind of standard Windows keystrokes, or for most of them anyway, we use space and .8 with a number of other keys. So for example, if I want the Windows Shift key, I would hold .8 chord with .7. If I want Control, I can use .8 chord with .3. Insert is .8 chord with .2. And so on. Like the Windows key, I can access from .8 chord with .4. So if I wanted to go to the desktop, I can go .8 chord with .4, and then M, and it's not going to let me do it.
Escape.
Reason. Always the way.
Desktop, folder view, list view, Outlook, 3 of 35. To move the items, use the arrow keys. To edit the selected.
Run dialog, I can do the same thing. .8 chord with .4, and then the letter R.
Notepad, run dialog. Type the name of a program, folder, document, or internet resource, and Windows will open it for you. Open : edit combo. Notepad, 1 of 23. To set the value, use the arrow keys or to enter.
For a moment.
Untitled - notepad, edit.
If I want to bring up the if I wanted to do, for example, Alt F, I can do .8 chord with .6 followed by F.
Menu, file menu, new Control + N. To move through items, press up or down arrow N.
There is a little bit of a learning curve with this, and it did take me a sort of a couple of days of concerted effort to just get my head around that, and for it to occur to me naturally without having to think of which combination to use. We can also, by adding .1 to the .8 chord, we can access our function keys. So for example, if I want to
escape
do
menu bar, file to navigate, press escape, leaving menu bar, edit,
I'm going to use .8 chord with .6, and I'm also going to add .1 into that, which says to JAWS, I'm going to do Alt plus a function key. To get F4, I then use the letter D. So it uses sort of A through L, so A being F1, B being F2, and so on. So D would obviously be F4.
Desktop, folder view, list view, Outlook, 3 of 35. To move the items, use the arrow keys. To edit the select.
As I said, there is a little bit of, it does require a little bit of a learning curve. But once you sort of get used to it, I find I can do it quite comfortably without having to think about it too much. There are other things that we can do. So if I want to bring up my Windows search, for example, to launch, to type in something like Word, for example, I can hold down the right Shift key and .4.
Search box, edit, type in text,
and then
computer
from here
Braille.
I could type Word, for example.
Word app, press right to switch.
And then if
preview.
I wanted to go up and down, I could use space.1 for the up arrow, space.4 for the down arrow. So all of the sort of standard Windows keys or keyboard keys can quite easily be executed using the Perkins style keyboard on the focus display. The other thing that I really like about this solution that I should mention is the fact that because the focus can handle up to 5 devices connected over Bluetooth and 1 over USB, and it treats the Elbraille as a USB connection, I can be checking my email on the Elbraille or writing notes or whatever. I can have a text come in on my phone, and I can simply hit the menu key with .1, which switches me to my first Bluetooth connection, respond to whatever I'm doing on whatever I need to on the phone, and then hold the menu button and .8 to switch me back to the Elbraille. So I can do that really without touching my phone, which is quite handy. And you can have a number of different devices. So I have my work phone, my personal phone, and my work laptop connected via Bluetooth, and then the Elbraille via USB. And I can switch, between any of those devices on the fly without really taking my hands off the display. So that's quite a nice feature as well, and one of the reasons why I find this combination with the Elbraille a real powerhouse. Mm-hmm. The other thing that that we can do, if there is an alternative to remembering all of those sort of Windows combinations, and we can do that using a product called Lisi, which is developed by Hargen Consultancy. Now, Lisi Advanced has a range of features. It provides, shortcut keys for playing audio, listening to the radio, copying and pasting things in and out of the clipboard, accessing Twitter, Facebook, all of those sorts of things from anywhere. So it's quite a powerful application, and I don't have the time today to spend too much time on that. However, built into Lisi is a thing called Elegance for Elbraille, and you can, I believe, buy just this feature separately. Now, you can use this for the Elbraille, but you can also use it if you're using a Focus 40 display or any Focus display with JAWS. So even if you don't have the Elbraille, if you use your Focus display with a Windows laptop, you can use this. So what this does is, instead of having to remember the keystrokes, I can use a shortcut, which is we'll call it the OV chord, because it's the OV symbol in Braille. So it's spaced with dots 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. You'll hear that little click. Now, if I want the Windows, the run dialog, which would be Windows R, I can type W
Word space
R.
Recycle bin 20 of 35.
Except it didn't let me.
W. R. Escape. Win.
Not quite sure why that's not working. Whether it's something to do with the screen sharing. So I can do things like, if I want, Alt plus F, I can go A or Alt space F, and I can type that in. So I don't need to remember which Braille keys, provide all of the Windows keystrokes. If I want to do Alt Tab, I can simply do the off chord and go Alt space Tab, for example. I can also set up a whole bunch of little shortcuts. So if I do the off chord and I type in Run.
Notepad, run dialog. Type the name of a program, folder, document, or internet resource, and Windows will open it for you. Open : edit combo. Notepad, 1 of 23. To set the value, use the arrow keys or type the value. Alt plus O. Computer Braille.
Back to my desktop.
Escape. Desktop. Folder view list view. Recycle bin 20 of 35.
The Zoom window just to.
Window list dialog. Running application. Only include on top. Switch to button. Running application. JAWS Professional. JAWS Professional minimized. 2 of 9. JAWS Professional. JAWS version 2000.
I don't have to remember how to do Windows M. I can do OV chord. And I can simply type desk.
Folder view list view. Recycle bin 20 of 35. To move the items, use the arrow keys.
And there is a way
select
where
item,
you can go in and you can set up what those shortcuts actually do. So you can, you can, if you've got a particular shortcut that you use for a particular application, you can go in and customize all of those shortcuts. So that gives you quite a good way, particularly when you first get something like an Elbraille or you first start using a Focus 40 with JAWS. It gives you another way to access all of your shortcut keys and things without having to remember all of those chorded commands. And I found that that did help me when I first started using my Elbraille to get up and running. And I do sometimes still do that, particularly with some of those shortcuts like desk for my desktop that I've set up. So that's an easy way of doing it. It also provides ways of doing things like selecting text from your Braille display and that type of thing. Again, without having to remember a lot of complex keystrokes. So that sort of gives you hopefully a little bit of an idea of some of the power behind the Elbraille and what that can do. When you combine that with a lot of the features offered natively in JAWS, like your text analyzer and the ability to skim read and all of those sorts of things, it really is quite a powerful little package. Mm-hmm. Having access to the Windows device as well means that you can run things that are a little bit non-standard. Now, I was hoping to be able to demonstrate a program called JJ Flex, but I'm having a bit of an issue with accessing that today. But I can certainly talk you through how that operates. So the local radio club that I'm a member of has a remote amateur radio station up on top of a hill with a 50-foot or 100-foot tower or something. Way better than anything I would be able to use at home. I've got a small backyard, you know, and I get quite a bit of electrical noise and other interference. So the idea of this is that someone who's in perhaps a retirement village or lives in a block of units, and they don't tend to like you sticking antennas on the roofs of blocks of units. It's a good way to get yourself thrown out. Can use this system remotely from their Windows computer or even their iPhone. One of the problems with that particular system is that it's quite visual, because these new software-defined radios, they can listen to a whole section of the band at once, and they give you a nice graphical display of where all the stronger signals are. When the local radio club first put this in, I thought, that's me out. I'm not going to be able to make use of this. But I came across an application called JJ Flex, which I run on the Elbraille, and it's specifically designed for controlling this type of radio with a Braille display. And what it does is it gives me, instead of having a nice visual display of the piece of bandwidth that you're listening to, it gives me a line of Braille, which I can read on my Focus 40. The weakest signals on the band are displayed as sort of the lower letters of the alphabet, A, B, and C, and so on. The strongest signals are represented by your higher letters sort of through, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. So I can read along the line and go, okay, there's a letter W. That's obviously a strong signal. If I then press the cursor routing button above that letter, I can switch the radio to that frequency and listen to what that strong signal is. So I've been in a situation where I've been away in the caravan with my partner, and I've had the Elbraille on the table in front of me, hooked up via the LTE modem to the internet, running JJ Flex and talking to a guy in America, which is great, because I wouldn't be able to set up a radio mast in the caravan park, and otherwise I wouldn't be able to access this sort of thing. But with the JJ Flex application, the fact that I can run that on the Elbraille, I don't need anything else, any external connectivity or anything. I can pass away a wet evening in the caravan chatting to a guy in the States. So it really does offer quite a powerful solution, and it enables me to do a whole lot of different things that to do any other way would require several different pieces of equipment: my iPhone, a laptop, a Braille display, a headset, microphone, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So for me, this solution works extremely well and allows me to do a whole lot of different things.
So yeah, thank you, Damian. That was really great. So that covers a lot of ground. So yeah, we've got time for questions now, and I'll just share my screen.
Sorry,
I can all see that. So yeah, if anybody's got any questions, we have had a few in the chat. So I'll just switch back to the video. And right, okay. So one of the first ones we'd had was, this one was for Danny. Somebody just wanting a bit more of an explanation. When you activate Windows Alt for text analyzer, how's that different to what JAWS would normally read out? So they just a bit unclear of the difference.
The biggest difference is it takes you directly to where it thinks you should be paying attention. So, for example, if there was a font change, it'll drop the cursor directly on where that first starts. So, yeah, absolutely, you can go through your document line by line and get all of that information read, no problems at all. But things like where your text analyzer comes into its own, and I demonstrated this a couple of times, is if you have quotes that are not closed properly, you have brackets you forgot to close, you've got extra spaces, it will alert you to all of that sort of stuff, and it puts the cursor directly on there. So there's multiple ways of proofreading documents. As I said at the beginning, that's just one of the methods I use to do it.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you. I think that was just a bit of clarification.
Yep.
Another question about, this was more about JAWS and possibly with the Focus 40 to anybody, was how does it go with tracking changes and comment boxes? I guess that was in Word when you were looking at that. I think you can access those areas with JAWS, can't you? I don't know.
That is something I'd need to look at off the top of my head. That's going beyond the sorts of things I usually do with Word. So off the top of my head, I'm not sure. As far as I'm aware, it does work. Basically, the rule is that if JAWS can access it, then the Braille Display can access it.
So in the settings center in Word, you can enable or have it announce track changes in different ways. You can either tell you what the change is, or you can just have it tell you that there is a change at that point in the document. So if JAWS speaks it, then you should also get an indication from the Braille Display that that's happening as well. So it's something that you can turn on or enable in Word if you need to through the settings center.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Damo. Okay, so hopefully that explains that one. Rosemary's asked, can the Elbraille operate with both Microsoft 365 and Google Drive platforms equally? So I'd say.
Well, it's you've got to remember that the Elbraille is just running. It's essentially a Windows device running JAWS. So yes, I haven't used the Office 365 online with it because I prefer the desktop applications, but you certainly can. Yes, I have done it with JAWS before. I much prefer using the desktop version of Word, but you can certainly do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't played with Google Sheets too much or Google Docs, but it does work without too many problems. It's just perhaps not as efficient as the desktop app.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and you can certainly use the Google Drive things as well. There are a few settings within Google Chrome you have to do to get JAWS and Braille working properly, but yeah, that's certainly feasible. Checking on some other questions. Will the Elbraille be compatible with the upcoming Windows 11? Now, I have seen through the various from the suppliers that it will be. So
yes, I believe so.
That's not something we've got to. Windows 10 is going to be around for quite some time yet. So as far as I'm aware, that's true. Can you? This is another one for Danny possibly, or either of you. Can you get to the text analyzer via the settings center as well? Somebody else uses the proofreading scheme.
Yep, you can get to the text analyzer with the settings center. That's actually where you switch on and off what it looks for. So yes, you can enable it there. You can also enable it if you want to just have it set to automatic mode where it comes up as you read through a document. You can also press your JAWS key plus the space bar followed by the letter A, and that'll toggle the thing on and off as well. The way I was doing it with the Windows Alt I, that's just a manual way of doing the same thing.
Okay, and we've had another question. How can Elbraille be integrated into a mainstream primary school? How many hours would a child need to learn to use it, and what's the recommended age to start learning this technology. Now, I have been working with a teacher here in New South Wales to learn to use it, and gives me the opportunity to mention we were able to, as well as being able to plug in a monitor, and you can get the small monitors via HDMI so that you can provide sighted assistance. We have actually found there is a way of connecting and using an iPad as the display, using something called Duet Display. So it is possible. As to the age, I don't know if anyone else has an opinion on what age, but I think this was a primary school student. So
yeah, I certainly think you could. You start people, a student, using a Braille display and using Braille very early, particularly with things like the Braille study mode, where you can have it speak the characters to you and that sort of thing. One thing I would say too is that because the Elbraille is a Windows 10 device, you can, in terms of the schools or the district IT department, it's no different to any other Windows 10 device. So they can hook it up to a monitor, a keyboard, and a mouse, and use it as they would any other Windows device. So if a piece of software needs to be installed for something that they're doing in class and that kind of thing, the IT department can access it. Whereas with a lot of other Braille note-taker devices and things, because the interface is so customized, the IT guys often are not quite sure how to deal with it, whether it's a security risk, whether they want it on their network, all of those sorts of things. So for all intents and purposes, this will appear to the IT department as any other Windows device, and they can treat it very much as such.
And also it goes without saying, that's also the case when it comes to workplaces as well, because it's a Windows 10 device. It's basically a bring your own device situation. So however they handle that at your workplace is how this would be handled. Yep,
absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for that, Danny. Somebody has asked for the internal specifications for the Elbraille. I can perhaps email that to people in the follow-up email.
Yeah, there's more than one. There are several variations available depending on, number one, how much money you want to spend and how much speed or performance you want out of it. There's several different variations on it.
The one that I'm using here is an i5 with 8 gigabytes of RAM and a 128 gig solid-state drive. So
Thank you, Damian.
It's the mid-range unit.
Yeah.
But there are other options as well.
Yeah, there's an M3 processor as well. Somebody's asked the cost. I'll just bring that up. I think for the whole device, for the i5, I think it's just for the Focus 40 and the Elbraille, it's around $8,000.
Yep.
For the Elbraille itself as a docking station, if you've already got that, then that was about $3,500, I think.
Yeah, it depends on what you already have as to what the prices are. If you already have a copy of JAWS, obviously we factor that into the price. If you already have a Braille display of Focus 40, we factor that in as well. It depends on what devices you already have when you're looking at buying one of these.
And I was in and that was one of the other things that attracted me to it, is the fact that I already had a Focus 40 and I already had a license for JAWS. So it meant that all I had to purchase was the Elbraille dock. The Focus dropped straight in. I activated my copy of JAWS and away I went.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, guys. So, okay.
We've had a question on funding options, Beck.
Yeah, do you want me to answer that one?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
So, we have had people obtain an Elbraille through things like the NDIS or Job Access. Obviously, it depends on your particular use case, whether it matches up with your goals and your needs, or in the case of a workplace, the barriers associated with doing your job. But certainly, it is possible through NDIA and Job Access. I don't know about the other any other funding streams, sort of such as My Aged Care and so on, but certainly from those two, it is certainly doable if you in the right set of circumstances, if there's a justification there.
Yeah, there's also some state-based funding options as well, but I can't comment too much on those. That's sort of a bit out of my area.
Yeah,
as to how different states handle it.
Yeah, so there will be education and things. got one question on, somebody's got considerable issues for a student regarding the interface with a learning platform, which makes it almost unusable. It's an AIS learning platform. I don't know, I might need to get you to...
Yeah, get in contact with us by phone.
We
can have a chat.
So we can maybe follow up with you on that. So it would depend on the accessibility of the program itself, I guess, with any screen reader. So yeah, if JAWS can access it, then, or screen readers can access it, then...
Yeah, that's definitely a question for phone contact or something similar for sure.
Okay. And I had a question from a Matthias about the name of the app mentioned that can be used to access websites. I was a little bit unclear what you meant, but on the Elbraille, at least you'd be using any normal browser if you're using JAWS as the screen reader. So
yeah, so I tend to use Chrome on mine, but Edge, Firefox, whatever browser you like, and you can in that menu where in the Elbraille menu, you can actually in the settings specify what browser it's going to run.
Okay, that's great. Somebody has asked, can JAWS be used with the mouse for browsing? They used to use that with window eyes, so that you can actually do that now if you've got some sight. It will echo the mouse. So that's in the settings center, I think. Yeah.
If it's not working, it's possible you haven't turned it on. It's not on by default.
No.
It is an option that needs to be enabled. So if you want information on how to do that, again, get in contact with us. Yeah,
and we will follow up. There were some other questions about general JAWS things, so we can certainly cover that. Always looking for input to our JAWS Bytes newsletter or contact us directly for software support. So I think, you'd answered things about how it connects to a computer, so either USB or if it's just to a laptop, USB or Bluetooth. So. I think I'll just check if there's any other questions. Can it be used for...
Somebody was asking about an e-commerce site, but I missed it. JAWS read it
before
I got a chance to.
They're asking whether it can be used for an e-commerce type website. Again, if you have, if it's a web-based thing and JAWS can get access to it, then absolutely you could use it on with an Elbraille. So again, you sort of, it depends on the accessibility of the e-commerce site itself. But if JAWS works with it, then absolutely you wouldn't have a problem.
And the other question about whether the Elbraille has a built-in camera, no. Generally, with built-in cameras, they're usually built into the screen of the device, and the Elbraille does not have a screen. So no, it does not. It doesn't have a built-in camera.
I have used it though with just a standard sort of Logitech webcam with a tripod, and that works really well.
Oh, you could certainly do that. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. One other thing I could mention is that you can actually, we have the things like scanners and anything that's Windows compatible. You can use, so for example, we've got the Pearl camera you could use as a portable scanner with it to scan into JAWS, which now has OCR capabilities or even OpenBook. So if it's Windows and you can put it on Windows, you can put it on the Elbraille generally.
There was also a question there about Braille devices and using things like Excel. Absolutely. I mean, JAWS provides really good support for things like Excel. And I find that if I am using spreadsheets or, I use the Braille Display a lot so that I don't have to try and keep figures in my head. Because for whatever reason, I don't have a good memory for lots and lots of numbers. So I find that having Braille there when you're using something like Excel is quite handy.
Well, thanks, Damian. That's great. Somebody had asked about the recording. That will get sent round automatically once we've sorted it out to everybody that's registered and is online. So we can certainly do that. And if you've got any questions you think of afterwards, we can certainly answer those as well. So I guess I'll just finish because I think that appears to be all the questions. Hopefully we've got to all of those. So that's been a really comprehensive session. So thank you so much to you, Damian, and to Danny. I'll just briefly share our contact. And thank you to Peter for being the camera person as well. So if people do want an individual demonstration, then by all means contact us on 1300-883-853 or email info@quantumrlv.com.au, and that there is some information on our website, quantumrlv.com.au. Obviously with COVID at the moment, things are a bit tricky, but we're still operating, so we can do things virtually and normally face to face. So yeah, thanks again to everybody for attending, and we might leave it there. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.